If you looked at your syllabus, it says to be determined, the 26th of November. We're trying to figure out who is actually here. We've had the occasion where we've invited quality people and the class has eroded. We've wasted the opportunity, potentially insulted somebody that we brought here to speak before us. So I decided this year not to make a mistake and to ask you how many of you, I would like to convene a really quality session and we can tape it, etc.
This is on the Tuesday?
The Tuesday, yeah, the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. How many people are not going to be here? I'm not going to be here. Put your hands down. How many people are going to be here?
Yeah.
I've seen some people whose hands haven't gone up. Either way. Again, alligator hands.
Wait, I'll be here.
One more time. How many people are going to be here?
I have school.
Oh, okay, says you. All right, thank you. So we'll figure out what we're going to do on that class. I got it. I understand. So thank you for your
bus tickets.
For those of you who are celebrating on Tuesday, there is no class. The EPIIC holiday, right? Yeah. Do you want to explain what the holiday is?
Does everyone know what Eid al-Adha is?
Yeah. No.
Want to explain it?
We don't have class because of Eid.
No, I wish. We don't have class because of Columbus Day and we're following.
Who is a Muslim, by the way? You haven't heard it. We don't have class. More enthusiasm from Bahar than I've ever seen for the class. Don't have class! Yes! Okay, back to a serious moment. Bahar, I'm joking. Guys, all right. So I met Stephen, as I said, in Istanbul. I guess that's not Turkey. And we're going to try to figure out ways to communicate and use the network, particularly in Egypt. But Mona will be here on Thursday with Wal, the person from Google. David Rhodes will be here. And so, as I said to some of you, we've done this sort of backwards. The ideal thing would have been, from my point of view, to have had David Rhodes first, talk about large meta issues of U.S. foreign policy and their failure, and then take a look at the efforts at entrepreneurship, and indeed, as Stephen has talked about, it's something which did not strike deep roots, but is a critical aspect of things, and then to have had Curt, going from, as it were, the macro to the micro. We're very, very pleased that Curt is with us. And one of the things that Stephen talked about that resonated very fully with me, and I hope you heard it, is this concept of mentorship from within. For me, that's another way to understand community. And the reason that Curt is here is because of Mike Nikonchuk. And so the first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to introduce yourself, Michael. Who are you? You know the procedure here.
I will introduce myself very quickly and then introduce the person who actually has a lot more to say than I.
Yeah, I know. Don't make me have to fill in the mortar.
I'm Mike Nikonchuk. I graduated from Tufts in 2011. I've participated in a lot of IGL activities, but somehow did not do EPIIC, and I thank God for that every day. And he still likes me. After I graduated, I participated in the BUILD program. I founded the program in Guatemala and the Oslo Scholars Program. And Sherman sent me to other places, to Bolivia, to look at Iran's investment in the energy sector there. And after graduation, I worked at the Schwab Foundation at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, looking at issues of impact investing and social entrepreneurship. And one of my tasks was to do the due diligence process for the Regional Social Entrepreneur of the Year for the Middle East and North Africa. And my boss, Curt Rhodes, was one of the finalists in that competition. So my job was to stalk him and find out all the bad things about him. And there's a very long list. And so when it came time for the interview, Curt was the only finalist who actually did his interview in person. And so I got the chance to interact with him. And because of my work with Oslo Freedom Forum and the IGL, with Justine Hardy and Ezzeddin Al-Wudesh and people like that, I got really interested also in ideas of trauma psychology and things like inherited trauma and the generational experience of war. And when I met Curt, he brought up a lot of those feelings, because I also have my own family's experience of civil wars and the impact that can have even on children and grandchildren after a conflict. And working and talking with Curt really reignited that spark in me, and after about 6 months at the forum, I ended up begging Curt to hire me at Questcope, and then I ended up there. And since I began work there in May of 2012, my work has shifted significantly to focus now on, I'm the emergency response coordinator for Questcope, so I do a lot of the coordination and design work for our programs for the Syrian refugee response, with a particular focus on the Zaatari refugee camp in northern Jordan, which is home to about 140,000 people, all Syrian, most of whom cannot leave the camp. So that has been my trajectory since 2 years after I left Tufts, and it's my pleasure to introduce my boss. Can I continue now?
No.
Am I done?
You're done.
I'm done.
You're almost done. What he's talking about is the country of Guatemala, when he talked about your family before. Mike has lectured, I think, for several of you in Arabic in your Arabic classes in the last couple of days. I understand you had a really vibrant forum last night with EPIIC students thinking about...
Yeah, who was there last night for the research discussion? Yeah, a lot.
Super, okay. We're trying to sensitize ourselves to a whole set of issues. And is part of a long-term, part of your community. It's going to be a lifelong relationship, as we well know. His brother, for those of you who are in global health or knew about global health, works directly with Dr. Paul Farmer, and it's a pretty distinguished family. So, yes, thank you. Mike is going to be around.
I'll be talking tomorrow and the stuff. You can
Right.
check it out.
What are you doing? Why don't you just talk about what that is, please? What are you doing tomorrow?
Tomorrow at noon, during Open Block, Curt and I will be hosting a really informal discussion and workshop looking at the structure and architecture of the humanitarian response for the Syrian crisis, but also the potentials of integrating more of a design thinking approach into humanitarian planning. So for any of you who are interested in getting into that field or into the development field, because the two are very much overlapping, especially nowadays, please join us. It's on the Google Doc where it is. I don't really know where it is.
Breaker 118.
Thank you, Breaker 118. And then tomorrow night at 8 o'clock, I'll be talking particularly about young refugees, ones that are your age, ones that used to be in seats much like this as university students in Syria and whose lives have been completely demolished in the past year and a half. So looking at issues such as anger, radicalization, vulnerability, and the idea of reconstructing roles for people when pretty much everything has been involuntarily taken from them. I had the privilege of doing some video interviews with some young men who have been the products of smuggling out of the refugee camp, who participated with the Free Syria Army, and I put together their interviews just for you guys. So if you're interested in those issues, please join tomorrow night.
And what happens this evening?
Curt, they have to come to that. So you'll hear Curt again after a couple hours.
Dude, I have to come.
You do have to.
Sit down. Before Curt, I get on to you, I just want to introduce one more pivotal part of our lives. Cody? Yeah, over here. Yeah, you should. Who are you in this context?
Hi, my name is Cody Valdez. I'm a Canadian former EPIIC student. I went through the grinder 3 times.
3 times, right? So for Mike, he compensated for Mike.
He was just released from the asylum yesterday.
Is that
I
a
don't have a
record?
haircut. I'm just growing like a man.
Is that a record?
I think Keith Fitzgerald
Yeah, it
also
was
did it 3.
Keith.
I think you had a couple of people who did it 3 times. Yeah.
Oh, it was just so inspiring. I started as a freshman in 08 doing global studies, and then went on to South Asia in 09, and moved to Kenya a year after to start a NGO with a great friend and former colleague and EPIIC student, Rachel Brown. We were doing conflict mitigation work in slums by creating SMS networks that would allow us to disseminate information in live time during a crisis. And we were all preparing for the 2013 elections that happened this March. And things are going great there, and that's a total baby of the IGL, that project. So I came back and did global conflict in 2010, and I've been just very engaged and happily engaged in the IGL communities. Most of my friendships came out of that while I was at Tufts. I graduated in May, and right now, relevant to what Steve's talking about, I'm working on a social enterprise of that exists in Vancouver and Seattle with an old colleague and mentor of mine who's a cognitive development trainer, and we're providing a cognitive development service to autistic youth.
Also, one of the synaptics, for those of you, again, there are about, I think, 14 freshmen in this class. So synaptics is what?
Synaptics is a intellectual community that Sherman helped instigate about 6 years ago. And we're just, you know, like all 4 generations of students at Tufts that come together, think together, and really provide mentorship within the Tufts experience to one another.
So we very much would like you to be alert to when those interviews are taking place. I pushed this thing off the ramp, and it's been a self-generating fellowship. So don't try to lobby me. I'm irrelevant. The class, each successive class is chosen by the members of Synaptics. And it's just been a delight. But as you know, Alex, one of your TAs, is a Synaptic as well. And it's great to have you back here.
Yeah, thanks.
And the reason you came back is because of the friendship you developed with that creature.
Yeah, just visiting.
Yeah, creature. So I'm going to knit it one more time in terms of what's what. Remember this?
Yeah, I saw that.
You saw that, huh? Okay, so we're going to be dealing with refugees in just 2 minutes. If you give me 2 more minutes, Curt. Curt's going to be with us for the remainder of the week. A number of you have seen him one-on-one. That's turned out to be quite wonderful, I think. But in yesterday's session, I think there were 3 or 4 people that I exposed this to, this little bit of fun. This is Allies. This is the joint research project looking at the impacts of the Iraq War in Jordan. Policy recommendations from Amman, where they were in June 2008. So this was looking at the first diaspora of Iraqi refugees. We didn't anticipate the Syrian situation whatsoever. I'm going to be interested when you take a look at this to see what you thought of the recommendations at that point. What's germane, I think this is, I'm quite sure this is up on the website under resources. I think that's...
Yeah, it's on the archive site.
It's on the archive site. By the way, your whole history can be found at tigl.archives.
No, archives.
Archive?
TIGLarchives.org.
Archive?
Archives.org.
I have no clue. There it is, you found it. Excellent. And if you go to resources or go to Allies, etc., you'll receive this. When Allies went to Jordan, they must have seen here, I don't know, Alex, because the fun part about this, I looked, I didn't quite remember this, I should have. I took a look at the delegation of Allies, and sure enough, Alex Taylor was on that. You organized it, so who would remember? Do you remember? How many interviews?
Something like 35 in like 10 days. It was pretty intense.
It was good, huh?
Yeah.
So we have the source here, and this is all in the service of continuity. So the mentorship is another way to understand what we hope happens for you. And I'm hoping that what happened last night was really positive for you, and what will continue to happen with Mike and with Cody will be wonderful. Stephen Coltai is joining our community. The entrepreneurial ecosystem that he talked about is something he's helping to create for Tufts 10, for Tufts into its future, and we're going to be a large part of that as an institute in terms of the different facets of what we do. So, a bit of memorabilia, and I just think it's quite wonderful. You're having a nostalgia because the other person who's in, you are, aren't you? Yes. Because we showed you the, when I wrote to Tim and told him that I'd shown you the Hezbollah video, he said, oh my God, no. He said, things have changed so radically. I mean, it's so much fun how people run away from their work as undergraduates. I'm so proud of it. But they...
Tim was on this too.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Tim was on that trip as well. So I'm looking forward to forgetting this, 5 to 10 years out in its details, but not in the impact that it's had upon you or upon me. So, welcome to all of this. Curt's new, comes to us via Michael. Come on up. This gentleman, when I realized what Prescott was all about, it was immediate for me. I spoke to the Mayer family and said that I think I have the first candidate for this particular year. And while Isabel Coleman is coming on the 14th and cannot come back to the symposium, so that evening there's a dinner and a program for us. And the award of the Jean Mayer, the first person I actually thought of to give this, what I hope is a prestigious acknowledgement and celebration, similar to what Stephen Coltai was talking about. When I looked at the website, I was blown away. Then I realized who you were, and Michael has really helped me understand this more formally. So again, in the tradition of EPIIC, if you can give us a bit of your own intellectual autobiography, welcome to us, and it's going to be a delight to have you back here for the symposium.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I don't often get to speak in English, so if I stumble on an Arabic word every now and then, sort me out. I'm a storyteller, and I have 35 years of stories from living in the Arab world. From the time that I began at the American University of Beirut as the assistant dean in the School of Public Health, through the period of the 82 invasion of West Beirut, subsequent moving my family out of Beirut in 1984 because of the threat of kidnapping, finally leaving myself from Beirut, parked my family 112 miles away from Beirut in Cyprus, continued to work in Upper Egypt, worked in northern Syria where Aleppo is or was, have taught at the university or taught in Damascus preventive medicine in English for young physicians who would like to go to the United States or the UK to study. Moved to Jordan with my family in 1990, and I'm still there. So it's a great place to raise daughters. If I didn't have sons, or I would have said it was a great place to raise sons also. In 1982, when I was at the American University of Beirut, one of the things happened in my life that completely redirected redirected my life and changed the way that I thought about everything. In the period of the invasion of West Beirut, the university, we never have, in all the 150-year history of the American University of Beirut, we've never closed the doors of the university. But we have suspended classes. How's that for bureaucratic? Shuffle. Okay. If you're a Bruce Willis fan, that's the Kansas City Shuffle. So while we were suspending classes, I volunteered in a clinic that had actually been established by community members in 1975 at the start of the Lebanese Civil War. And my responsibility was to do triage for the families of Palestinian fighters, the people who lived in Sabra and Shatila camps. So they were all in various car parks and basement storage areas in the high-rise buildings in West Beirut. And every day I went with a different armed group to a different building or a different car park to direct the care of people. Everything from children with fevers of unknown origin to women who needed cesarean sections to be able to deliver babies. So it's quite a challenge. My own background is in preventive medicine, so it's a little bit of a challenge to be delivering babies when you're supposed to be doing preventive medicine, but babies tend to deliver themselves at a certain point. At the end of that period of time, in I believe it was August or September, when the Palestinian PLO fighters went out of Beirut through Damascus or to Tunis, and their families went back to Sabra and Shatila and were massacred. That was the event that turned my life upside down. So the rest of my story hinges on that particular experience. I want to talk a little bit about how I have understood empowerment and how I've understood empowerment of marginalized people. There is a book called Whose Reality Counts by Robert Chambers. Are any of you guys familiar with Robert Chambers at the University of Sussex in Brighton, England? For the Anglophone world outside of the United States, Robert Chambers is the godfather of the understanding of participation. So everybody who does, are you familiar with terms like appreciative inquiry? Good. I'll try something else. Participatory rapid appraisal. What are some of the words that you use in the United States, Mike? Do we not participate with people in the United States? what vocabulary do we use if we're going to participate with communities of people? Methodologies. Community engagement, that's a good one. So Robert Chambers is a mad British professor. Not mad in the American sense like angry, but mad in the British sense like he's insane, he's mad. And he's a good, close personal friend, which could be dangerous, right? It takes one to know one. So Robert's idea of participation is not that I fix it so that you will participate with me, but that I fix myself so that you will allow me to participate with you. So that puts the shoe on a different foot. So his whole idea about participation is about changing the flow of power. Or you can think of power as water. What's up? Water always flows downhill. So how do you get people who are not up? His book, Putting the Last First, was published in 1979. In 1997, they published the sequel called Putting the First Last. So in that brief, almost 2-decade period of time, Robert fooled us all. We thought he was talking about specialty. You know, we're special people, right? We're the guys who go to university. We're the people who have the smarts. We have the degrees. And so our goal is to help you. But after 20 years, he wrote his second book, which says really the goal is how we put ourselves last. That's quite a position to find oneself in. I want to tell you some of the lessons about how I've learned or observed, because I can't say that I've, we always talk about lessons learned in projects. Most of our lessons are not learned, they're actually observed. It takes a long time to learn lessons. So these are some lessons observed over the past years, past 35 years. And the paradigm that I want to put into your mind is a film with Matthew McConaughey called How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. Now, if you really want to get, and I found it quite interesting. I forgot the actress's name. What was it? Sorry? Kate. Okay, I always confuse her with Drew Barrymore. Okay. So remember, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is, that's the one thing that you're always you don't want to do, right? You don't want to lose a guy. You don't want to be the kind of drippy girl. You don't want to show up and whatever it was in there. You want to actually do the opposite. So what we want to do sometimes, some of the stuff today, is talk about all the things that we wouldn't want to do to people. Okay, how to lose a guy. But why was it 10 days? Yeah, it had nothing to do with the reality of losing the guy. It was a magazine editor's deadline that she had to meet. So it's a totally artificial construct. So there's a lot of artificiality that we're going to have to deal with in not losing a guy for 10 days. So here we go. We're going to go back to 1993. In 1993, there was a nationwide nutrition survey in Jordan because we felt that people were hungry. So we did a survey in Jordan, and one of the things that was discovered was cases of marasmus and kwashiorkor. Everybody's okay with kwashiorkor? Protein malnutrition. And marasmus is protein and energy malnutrition. You will die from both, but you waste away with kwashiorkor. And in marasmus, you kind of fill with fluid and you look like you're plump until you die as a child. And it's very serious, and nobody had ever found it in Jordan before. At that very same week that this particular UN organization discovered marasmus in Kwashiorkor in a village called Birmanpur, I was there, and our team was doing a study on small business opportunities for women in Bedouin communities. And what we observed is that all of the children who were starving to death were the children of absent mothers. It was the Hansel and Gretel syndrome, where your stepmother doesn't want you to live because she's going to have children of her own to inherit. So the mother simply left their children, the children of the absent mother. Either she had passed away or she was divorced or there was some reason. So the nationwide survey finds children who are starving to death. But what they didn't do was look beyond what they were looking for to see, I wonder why they're starving to death. Does that make sense? So if you're going to learn to put the last first, you're going to have to ask your unasked question. Is there another question around here that would give me more insight as to what's going on? This had major impact in Jordan, of course, because it led to a national school feeding program for $3 million. In 1993, $3 million would be $30 million today. It led to the creation of a food package from experts at the University of Jordan. Dried macaroni, tinned Australian craft cheese, you know, all kinds of things that Bedouins eat, right? No, they didn't eat that stuff. So nobody knew what to do with it, but it was nutritionally balanced. What happens when you don't get the last, you know, some of the last opinion in your consideration? The south of Jordan was also then defined as the defining characteristic of a good politician. So politicians vied with each other for, I'm a better politician than you are because I did more for the south of Jordan. So everything in the south of Jordan became a political football, which as Americans today watching our government, we know what happens when decisions become political footballs. You can almost get no decision at all. So the expert position is, we look for what we're looking for. Does that make sense? We don't look for what is there. We look for what we're looking for. It's extremely dangerous, and that's one way to lose a guy in 10 days. 1995. Some of you were born by 1995, right? Okay, good. This is good. I want to tell you about one of the most fantastic experiences that I have ever had with an institution, be it Arab or non-Arab. In this particular town of Irbid in the north of Jordan, there was an organization called the Family Protection Society. The Family Protection Society mostly was made up of school teachers who were concerned about the young people in their community. And of course, most of the school teachers were male because most of the delinquents in the community were male. We don't have delinquent girls in the Arab world. Okay, we have only delinquent boys. That's not really true. But we do have more delinquent males. How about that? So these delinquent males, upon release, then they go out and they do something and they go back to incarceration. And then they get out and they do something and then they go back to incarceration. So the school teachers observe this, and school teachers in Irbid all run side businesses. So they fix mufflers, they do body work on your car, because being a school teacher doesn't pay you enough. So each of them took in one or two of these delinquent boys into their businesses. Great idea, right? I mean, say something.
Yes.
Great idea. Social entrepreneurs. Well, it didn't work because the young boys that came in, they stole equipment. What they couldn't steal, they destroyed. What they couldn't destroy of the equipment, they used to destroy the workshops. They cursed the clients. They destroyed the businesses. So everybody in the Jama'il Khairi, everybody in the charitable society, thank you, decided that they would never, ever, ever do that again. So they asked me to come up and listen to their story. And essentially, they wanted me to say, you're right. I wouldn't do that ever again either. Okay? Because I'm some kind of a big shot, you know. And so if they got the word from me, then they wouldn't have to worry about it again. So I listened to their whole story. When it was over, I said, you know, guys, it has been my honor to sit in front of the best documented, clearest stories ever told of one of the biggest F-ups I've ever heard. I've never heard anything quite this nice. Ever. And I don't think that I ever will. Well, that was not the expectation. You know, even, I didn't use the F word, you know. But, that was not the expectation. So they kind of looked at each other and said, so, that was good? I said, of course it was good. I said, how many organizations do you know who will spend 2.5 hours with an expert explaining all your mistakes? And what is the one thing that we keep saying about the way to learn best? We learn best from our mistakes. Thank you. So that means that we're not going to ever learn best because we're not going to share our mistakes. And you guys just broke the mold. So you're actually starting to put the last first a little bit, right? You made some mistakes and we're going to tell you. So I said, thank you. And they said, wait a minute. If we weren't going to, you know, that's how to lose a guy in 10 days. How would you not lose a guy in 10 days? I said, well, actually, and I drew a circle. And I said, if you put a bunch of pie slices in this circle, and then you label one of them as an economic slice, I said, that's the slice that you tried to make a kid be. And they come as the whole pie. We don't come as one slice. So if you could figure out how to be holistic in your response to the lives of these young men, then unfortunately I won't come back because you won't have any more mistakes to tell me about. So they did learn. They are now one of the 2 largest Jordanian non-government organizations, not started by USAID, not funded by USAID, not supported by any US government. They're completely independent. They will take the odd contract from now and then to do something, but they understand what they are there for. They are there to have a holistic approach to the young people in their community who are in trouble. There are others. There's another organization called the Al-Farouk Society, which has gone through much of the same thing, where they made enough mistakes that they realized that they were picking ologies, psychology, anthropology, sociology, but I'm made up of more than the ologies that describe me. There's a person inside of me called Curt that I would like you to know I'm there, and maybe talk to me once in a while. You know, this is what we're talking about, putting the last first, empowerment. A lot of the reason I mention these other agencies is now everybody has discovered the Arab world. Once the Syrian crisis happened, or the Tunisian crisis, or the Egypt crisis, suddenly the Arab world is there. So everybody's wanting to know, how can these agencies be delivery points for the services that we will provide them? Thank you. We're working this out. Okay. But it would be better for civil society if the donors said, I wonder how these entities came into being. Remember the difference between seeing a kid with kwashiorkor and understanding why that kid is starving? This is a good agency. I wonder how the agency came to be. Now you're reversing the flow of power, because it's no longer I have power and how can I use you to fulfill my purposes? But how did you get to be the purposeful organization that you came to be anyway? I might actually be able to learn something. There's a couple of questions that I constantly, you know, when you go to bed at night and you wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, And this is not during exam time, I'm talking about other times, okay? You wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and you think, what am I doing? You ever do that? When you're old enough to do this? And it's called, am I having regrets? Or was it just the pepperoni? Or was it Sherman? Or, you know, what was it that caused this? So there's just a couple of questions, 3 questions actually, that I can put myself back to sleep if I can answer them. And it relates to all of that. Who's benefiting? You know, when the water stops flowing, who's benefiting? The real beneficiary. I have to give you an example. It just happened 2 weeks ago. There are 2 refugee camps in Jordan. There is one called Zakari, which has 140,000 people in it. And there's one called Azraq that has no people in it. Okay. The UN we always learn our lessons 2 years after the fact. Okay, so we're expecting a large number of Syrians. So we've got the second camp ready. It may not happen, but we've certainly got it ready. And this second camp in Azraq has 8 or 10 basketball courts. Because the lessons from the Zatari camp are, you need something for young people to do, right? Especially boys. You've got to keep boys busy. You know, my grandmother told me idleness is the devil's workshop. You remember that? Did you have a grandmother like that? All Scottish Presbyterian grandmothers are like that. I don't know about Jewish grandmothers, but there are probably a lot of like. Okay.
Same DNA.
Same DNA. At a certain point, the grandmother DNA clicks in. So we have all these basketball courts that will probably never be used. But for that organization, the benefit has already happened. Because you can take a picture of it, you can talk about how you're avant-garde in your thinking, and the benefit accrues to the organization. Always ask yourself, who benefits? Always ask yourself, who benefits? The second one, how did the benefit happen? What was the process that led down to that benefit? Because if you can find the process, you can generally make it better, right? You can shorten it, you can sweeten it, you can do stuff. And you can also involve other people. For example, in the young boy or young girl in the south of Jordan, if somebody just asks them, do you like dried macaroni? And they may say, what's dried macaroni? Well, you know, it's like a carbohydrate. Well, we have rice. Well, then we should use rice. So you bring someone up a little bit in the decision-making process. You are putting the last first. This sounds so simple, and it is so rarely done. And then, who benefits? How does benefit happen? And how do you know it happened? Now we're talking about evidence. I'll leave you on evidence because evidence would take us into another whole discussion. But evidence is very important because it's not what I think I did. It's not what I wish I did. It's the evidence of what I did. We'll come back to that in a couple minutes. Are we doing okay? Am I staying on target?
I would like you to give a lot more examples from the actual work that you do from camps, etc.
Okay, well, okay, I can do that. Not my historical examples of what I did?
No, absolutely.
Okay, all right.
You said you were a storyteller, and I've heard some wonderful ones.
Okay.
So,
one of the things that holds my thinking together is the idea of the individual. The change needs to happen for the individual, but the institution, whether it's a community-based organization or it could be a large family, it could be a school, the institution has to respond to that positive change. And then the people that make the decisions that let the institution do that, the policymakers, where those three intersect, you have the best chance for sustainable development. So everything that I'm talking with you about today is that if you can put the last first, put the first last and cause that that center point to be larger in size, then you have a sustainable development. In 1998, one morning we walked, my staff and I walked into a juvenile care center. So in Jordan we have juvenile correctional centers, we also have juvenile care centers, where children who are left in baskets outside of churches and mosques are taken in as wards of the state, and they're raised in these care centers. And all of the enamel tiles in all of the bathrooms have been destroyed. So we asked, the enamel tiles go to the ceiling, by the way, in all the bathrooms. And they were all destroyed by taking the handles of the faucets off and breaking them one by one. So we asked the young men, what happened? Well, we don't know, but last night Yahya and Omran disappeared. And we don't know what happened to them. And if something happened to them, it could happen to us. So everybody went crazy. So I had a discussion with the director of the center, and I said, what happened to Yahya and Omran? He said, well, they're mentally challenged, so they shouldn't be here. So we sent them to 90 miles away to an institution for mentally challenged kids, a state institution. I said, who signed the order? Well, the head of corrections, the national head of corrections, who was a friend. So I called him and I said, Musa, what did you do with Yahya and Omran? I said, did you really sign the order? He said, yeah, I signed the order. I said, so you're not a physician. Who is the physician that told you that these kids are mentally retarded? They said, there's such and such a name. I said, was that physician certified to do that? Well, I don't know. Well, I said, I suggest that you find out if he was certified, because he did it at night, after hours. You know what that sounds like, right? So he said, well, this will take us a couple of weeks to sort it out. But I said, it took you one night to do it. Tomorrow I will send a car for Quesco down to the center to get those boys. And then we will go in and get them, and you will authorize us to take them. Which he did, fortunately. So as we got into more discussion, the director of the care center simply couldn't get along with these two boys, so he used his authority to get rid of them. So he put the first. So it was our job to look at the situation and say, this stuff can't be done like this. We have to make sure that somebody stands up so that the ones who are last go up a little bit. And this was the clearest example of institutional abuse that I had seen up to that point. We were very fortunate that I had the relationship with the correctional center, the national, the head of the correctional system, juvenile correctional system, to reverse it. 2004. Two young boys came up to me who were 14, Ahmad and Ayad, and they said, Ustaz, we dropped out of school when we were 9, and now we are 14, and our lives are over. We'll be making tea for guys who change tires for the rest of our lives. What could we do? Could we go back to school? Could we go to vocational school? And I thought, why not? So I went to the Vocational Training Corporation and said, can two young boys at age 14 go to vocational training school? No, they don't have a 10th grade certificate. Fair enough. How do you get a 10th grade certificate? Well, you have to have a 6th grade certificate to register to study for the 10th grade. I said, but they don't have a 6th grade certificate. Well, then they're going to have a 3rd grade certificate. I said, they need a 3rd grade certificate so they can sign up to get a 6th grade certificate so they can sign up to get a 10th grade certificate. Yes. I said, they don't have a 3rd grade certificate. Well, then there's nothing we can do for them. Fair enough. What do you do with people like that? Well, we have a literacy program that they can attend. So I attended the literacy classes. And the literacy classes are made up of people who are 70 and older, mostly ladies who never learned to read and write. And before they die, they would like to read the newspaper and the Quran. And they are willing to sit calmly, and the teacher speaks and they recite. Speak and recite. And it works fine if you're 70 years old. How long is IMAD and IAD going to be able to sit through that? So I thought, I've got to do something for them. So I sat, this took 2 years to bring about. I sat down and worked out in my head, we need an alternative curriculum for, you call it a GED, you guys are familiar with GEDs, right? You got to work out an alternative curriculum that's not really too alternative, that can be certified, that has testing, and there's never been one like this ever in the history of the Arab world. Shouldn't take more than 2 years, right? That's what it took, two years of drinking tea and discussing, until we reached a point with the Ministry of Education where I said one day, I said, I got 200 young people who'd like to come back to school. Impossible, illegal, you know the story, don't have a 10th grade, don't have a 6th grade. And I said, but if you would certify what we spent 2 years doing, then they could come back. But they don't have to come back into your classroom. They can come back into ours, but you can certify them. How do you like them apples? And they said, we like them a lot. So we established the first general education equivalence diploma in the Arab world. I could have put IMAD and IAD in the Schneller School for Palestinian boys who hadn't learned to read and write. But there's 150,000 IMADs and IADs. Schneller can take 30 a year. How am I going to ensure that IMAD and IAD as individuals can have a second chance? But what do you do with the, if you take 2 from 150,000, what do you get? 149,998? What do you do with those? So, because we are a social development organization, we had to think of a bigger solution. We had to figure out how we would put the last first. This is the most recent, because I wanted to take you up to where we are today. In the Zaatari refugee camp, and this is what the article that I was quoted in the New York Times yesterday is about. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to go back to Jordan after the article is quoted. The solution for Syrian children who have been caught up in that war and have been refugeed out of the country is to go back to formal school, right? Really? How many tens of thousands of children are there? And the Jordanian school system, what shape is it in to be able to take them in? Or if you need to build more schools, where will the money come from for that? And how will you staff it? And how quickly can you move it? And in fact, you're only focused on Zaatari refugee camp, which is only 25% of Syrians anyway, in Jordan. Do you see a few raw edges to this thing? No? I can't see you because of all these lights and noise. So the decision to put all Syrian children in formal education means that most Syrian children will not get an education. Do the math. If 75% of them are outside of that camp, and if you only have the capacity for 10,000 of 36,000 kids in that camp, do the math. It doesn't work. You're not going to put the last first. You're going to put the first again. We have schools, and we will take you. but we can only pick some of you with luck. So that's the current thing that we're involved in, is what do you do when all of your resources have been put into a direction and now the resources are gone and you cannot fulfill what your mandate was. Remember I talked with you earlier about evidence? So the organization that did this set a marker, an indicator. And guess what that indicator was? Numbers of children enrolled. So they ended up with 19,000 children enrolled in a place where you only have space for 10,000 children, and you only have 2,000 attending. But they didn't keep the attendance data. So the organization, if you pick the wrong indicator, then you can go merrily, merrily, life is but a dream, straight over the edge. And that's what's happened. So it's very important for us as individuals in the 21st century. You know, I've started the 21st century with you. I won't finish it with you. You know, your children will finish it with you. That we pay close attention to whose reality is going to count here. Where are you looking at the young people? Are you looking only in the camp? Not outside? Are you looking at the existing capacity of formal education? Or could you possibly provide education that's not formal? Which of course we had demonstrated to the Ministry of Education that you could actually do. You could actually do education outside of an education system. So I'll pause there, and I hope I've told you how you could lose a guy in 10 days. So you could understand how you might not. Okay. And the fact that the 10 days is an artificial construct. That we're always trying to deal with artificial constructs when we are attempting to deal with the reality of people. Because the world around us, the donor world, the official world, all of these things are artificial constructs that we have to deal with. We have half an hour for questions.
First of all, thank you. Before you take questions, Curt, can I just ask you to do some of the macro work that you did this afternoon, the generations, what the implications are of the closure of the schooling system for Syria?
Yeah, we have 3 years now where there haven't been, no one has graduated from university in 2013, no one graduated from university in 2012, no one graduated from university in 2011, and no one started university in 2010 or 2010 or 2009. So you have at least 5 or 6 years of young people who have no university option, who were either in university or planning to go. You also have the cohort where they were in high school before that, who have not completed high school. And of course, if you don't complete high school, you can't go to university. And then you have another 3 or 4 years of young people who haven't been in elementary school. So you end up with, if a generation is 15 years, you end up with 15 years worth of Syrians who will not be educated. This is very serious. Then you think of these 15 years, if magically, remarkably, Cinderella fairy godmotherly, tomorrow the situation in Syria stopped being what it is, and magically school systems started and it all worked, you would never compensate for those years that are lost, because educational systems can't play catch-up ball. Because you've got another bunch of kids who are 6, another bunch of kids who go to middle school. You don't get to play catch-up ball in an education system. So this is going to reverberate for at least 15 years. Please.
You guys were assigned, one of the things that we asked you to read was an assessment about education in Zaptity Camp, yeah? One of the things that it said, there's a tiny section, maybe half a page or 3/4 of a page long, about certification. How one of the many concerns of parents in Zaptity Camp was that the education of their children would be certified, so that when they go back to Syria, boom, they can hop right into the appropriate class. Now, you remember from that assessment, it was about that long. On Thursday of last week, about 12 hours before my flight, I was in an office of an unnamed UN agency in Amman that works with children, and we were talking about the numbers of kids that are out of school. In Jordan, the planning figures for 2012 and 13 is that there are going to be 288,000 Syrian children that are eligible for school. Almost 300,000 children in Jordan who are not Jordanian, who they need to accommodate somehow with educational services. The ultimate goal of anyone working in education would then be to make sure that those children do not disengage from learning. Because there's a short window you have when someone goes through a traumatic experience to then intervene and make sure that they don't disengage from family, from social relationships, from education, from a number of things. So the planning figure for the sector as a whole is also that in 2013, or in 2013-14, you are going to be able to work with 120,000 of those kids. So then I said, well, what happens to the rest of them? What happens to the 160,000 other than that number? Well, some of them are eligible, so we just need to keep, we need to do our best and try to accommodate them. And if they're not eligible, if they're eligible for school technically, which under Jordanian law means that they've been out for 3 years or less in their native school system or in the Jordanian, then we can't really do anything alternative with them because they're eligible for formal school. So I said, okay, so for a year, you're going to ignore almost 100,000 of them that are eligible. What happens in the second year? You're letting them become uneligible from your rules while the time that you're saying you're doing your intervention. And they said, well, there's no other way. What can you do? I mean, they need to progress grade by grade. I said, according to who? And they said to me, well, how else are they going to join back in Syria when they go back, when and if they go back? Fundamentally, they did not understand the Syrian education system, because in Syria, it's not like Jordan. When you're 14 years old, even if you've never been in school a day in your life, you can sign up for the exam that means that you have passed compulsory primary education. As long as you are 14 years old, that is the only thing that matters. So frankly, they don't give a shit if they have the certifications for every step up until becoming 14 years old. So just that fundamental misunderstanding of evidence, of what you're looking at when you're talking about a target population, it was a fundamental misplacing of where the benefit can and should lie. And it was a bit discouraging, but at the same time, it was very emblematic of what Curt has been talking about in terms of if your focus is what you're looking at, if your ideology or your mission is to do A, B, C, and D, everything about the problem is going to be filtered through that lens, without ever having to take a step to look at what's the ultimate goal for that child. What is he or she going to be put in after they have an experience in Jordan? And it's just something that's so often ignored in the calculation of people who are quote-unquote experts in that. Just wanted to add that.
To follow up, about a year ago, in a discussion with, I'll call him an older gentleman, he's younger than I am, but a sort of older gentleman. He said, we are supposed to send our kids to this building that there's 5,000 of them in there, and we don't know the teachers, we don't know what's going on in there, they're not Syrian teachers, especially for our daughters and for our younger kids, we're afraid of doing anything. He said, in our village in Syria, we had 350 kids in the school, we knew the teachers. Why couldn't we have schools like that in the camp, irrespective of the urban areas? So why couldn't we have that in the camp? And actually, you were the one who said to somebody, why couldn't we have these, schools? There's 140,000 people. Say 40,000 of them are needing schools. Divide 40,000 by 350. It's going to be costly, right? Will it be more costly than building 2 huge schools and having them destroyed 3 or 4 times by people who are angry and knock out the windows and tear off the toilets and occupy the school and have to be paid money to get out. Probably not more expensive. So eventually, when the camp is filled with Syrians who are doctors, lawyers, nurses, engineers, you name any profession you reach through education, and the camp is full of people like that, who sit and watch the UN programs be organized by, and I don't mean this personally, fresh graduates from American universities who studied at Georgetown. We'll blame Georgetown, okay? So you have highly qualified people who are watching this go on, and they think, what is going on here? These are actually our kids, our situation. So at a certain point, imams and teachers with experience have set up the small schools in Zatari so that they can educate their own kids. But the UN system has no way to interface with you if you're doing that, because that's not what the UN is committed to do. So we're in a situation where, because there was no thought about what's going on with the last, then there was no plan for the first to ever change the direction of power flow. This is serious.
Questions? Bruna?
Hi, my name is Bruna. Well, we always study how the colonial powers implemented school systems in their colonies, especially the French. Many countries still speak French. How would you say that the education system in these countries nowadays reflects the education system from the French colonial period or the British colonial period?
You mean the emergency education or the everyday education?
The everyday education, and if it's ideal for the realities of the country, or if there could be a better way.
Sorry? I just can't hear you, sorry. First of all, the education system in the Arab world doesn't work, okay? Regardless of the didactic pedagogy, and the fact that the younger generation of people in the world, which includes you, don't respond well to pedagogy, but you do respond well to independent learning. And the education is to ration opportunity. So when a lot of people pass the Tojihi exam, the high school leaving exam, you ratchet up the score to get into medical school to 99. When fewer people score high, then you could drop the score to get into medical school to 96. So it's a rationing system. It doesn't primarily create opportunity. It stops people from opportunity. So those are two bad things that go on. The other thing that, part of what our educational philosophy is based on is the learning philosophy of Paulo Freire. Are you guys familiar with Paulo Freire? That people can be educated to think and not be tools. And although the Arab world has gone great strides to help people not just be tools, it's too early. There are still more strides needed. Does that?
But like, is it because we're trying to implement Western ideas of education there, or? Like
Again, in the everyday system before the
yes,
crisis?
in the everyday system.
Most definitely. I mean, you guys know the industrial model, the discussion about education system now, there's the industrial model, industrial revolution model, the mass-produced education. We live with that still in the West, and we live with it in the East also.
You want to call on people?
I can't see.
Oh, okay. This lighting is quite remarkable. Is that Sam? Is that Sam? Who's here? Yourself?
Yeah. I'm Samantha. I was going to ask.
That is Samantha?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wearing glasses today.
I can barely see you.
Maybe
Yeah.
that would help. Oh, Samantha.
Hi. Several of the articles we read said that one of the predominant reasons for lack of attendance and enrollment in schools is parents not wanting girls to go to school. I guess they didn't really provide much other explanation than that, maybe why the parents didn't want the girls to go to school. So how do you, with Quest Scope and I guess your work with the education system, deal with that, since there's a whole idea of like what's the power of one, educating girls, then there's the whole, all the parents don't want the girls to be educated. Do you try to change their minds, or what's your approach with that?
Okay, Mike is making noises here. Go ahead, Mike. I'll have noises too.
Yeah, I'll make small, quick noises. We're in a culture of we are all Malala today, especially when it comes to girls' education. And to be very blunt, there's very few things that are sexier in the West than a veiled girl with a school book in her hands. No, seriously. It's something that's so appealing to a Western donor because it feels that they are helping something. They are helping to end oppression. And something that they're also afraid of. You know, they don't understand or know Muslim culture. They don't know the cultures that we're trying to engage in, and they see that as some sort of relic or emblematic, element of what we are trying to fight in this global war on terror. That terror also is in the form of lack of access to education. In Zatari, absolutely, there are many parents who don't want to send their girls to school. And this stays in this room, but 3 weeks ago, there was one morning when I was in Zatari camp, and one of the teachers from the school that was funded by the government of Bahrain came up to me, and she had this sad look on her face. And I said, what's up? She said, no work today. I said, why is there no work today? She works for us and also in the formal school. She says, well, at the Qatari school, which is a school funded by the Qatari government, on one side of the camp, a student who isn't enrolled in the school, a young boy, he was hungry, and he wanted one of the fortified date bars that the WFP provides. But they have strict rules from the WFP in the schools to not give those date bars to a student who doesn't enroll. It's a carrot they dangle in front of them. Enroll in school and you get a date bar. Come. So he wouldn't give him a date bar. Somehow this small kid and the teacher got into some sort of scuffle. And the teacher ended up hitting the student. Someone saw this, some old haji, some old man. The next day, the whole tribe of this kid shows up at the Bahraini school because someone had miscommunicated where this incident went down, busted the gates open, started scouring the entire school for this Jordanian teacher who hit their boy, hitting young girls as young as 8 years old out of the way. Girls were locked in their classrooms crying because they thought that these men were coming to hit them. Would you want to send your girl to school in that environment? No. No one does. It wasn't even the right school where they were doing that. There's a paranoid security climate in the camp and out of the camp where information does not get transmitted. And if it does get transmitted, it usually doesn't get transmitted correctly. So a minor incident in a functioning system, in a system that is in the light, that could have been resolved pretty quickly, even through tribal mediation, if need be. But you have this issue of mistrust between a Jordanian hit my Syrian child. All these structures that we've set up to make this problem much bigger than it needed to be. So that was one incident that, of course, reinforced I wouldn't send my daughter to school either. Another point is that in a culture where engagement is critical for having someone trust you, someone who's coming from a war zone, living in a tent, the school is 1 kilometer away, and their daughter wants to go. I don't know where you're going. This is a curriculum and methodology that I don't know, and I've never met your teacher. A lot of American parents wouldn't send their 8-year-old daughter to that school. But the immediate response is that Middle Eastern oppression of women. And then the donor climate focuses in on that. And it's all about raising awareness. And you can raise as much awareness as you want. He's still not going to send his daughter because he doesn't know the teacher. That's an issue of trust. And also looking at the psychology of people who are trying to send their kids. And there's a lot of simple steps as well, just having groups of girls walk together with an adult. There's lots of small things that you can do to encourage that. But there's a lot of structural things that go on below that that make it a little bit more complicated.
We haven't had that trouble in our education program in Zatari camp because all of our teachers are Syrians. So if something happened today in this building, and so, I was the one who came and told you what Sherman did, you would probably want to talk to a tough student about it, not me, right? You want to talk to somebody who knows Tufts. In fact, you might even want to talk to somebody who's in the Institute of Global Leadership before you made the decision about what Sherman did or didn't do. We like to talk to people that we know, especially if we're going to send our kids to them.
Stop fomenting trouble. Ma.
My question is the Syrian refugees, and I'm just talking about those who come to Jordan, that they've had a lot of difficulty finding a job that pays them or finding any kind of regular employment. So, once the PESCO program has ended, what do you do to ensure that the people who are enrolled in it are able to find positions, and how do you check up on them once the program is over?
We can't do anything at all. The government of Jordan has said that Syrians will not work. Therefore, we cannot do anything at all. And of course, Mike just pointed out, most of what we do with education is for under 18s who can't work anyway. It's not legal. Sorry? You mean education development plan? I mean, I can go into a whole bunch of things that we do to ensure that they have a future. And one of them, as Mike is reminding me, the educational development plan guides them into, if they can get to, in the camp there are some organizations that do some vocational training, because again, inside the camp the world is different, but the jobs are limited. And outside, if any Syrian wants to work, it's all illegal work. So it's an impossible situation. It's like Churchill said, it's a riddle wrapped in a mystery and posed in an enigma. You simply can't work. But how will you live if you can't work? So there's no solution for that. I will throw one other thing at you, or in your direction. In the program that we have for mentoring youth in Zaatari camp, which is growing, and will by January we'll probably be up to 1,500 young people, which means 300 or 400 mentors, which means 100 case managers. These people we can pay, and they're highly educated, and they're people who want to make a difference for their country. So there's a lot that we can do, but I can't tell you that we can actually help young people after they complete basic education, because I can't do that.
So I guess just what benefits do you think that they're able to get from PESCO that they wouldn't be getting if they weren't involved in education?
I mean, the education is the portable asset. And I would say the special way that they are educated. They're not educated to be tools, they're educated to think. And they are supported in relationships. So that's some of the biggest thing that we offer. Yes?
There was two cases, really briefly, two cases that I think of. I mean, in my work, I work with most of the older kids, with the kids that are our mentors and that are our case managers. I call them kids because they're a little younger than me or my age, and I'm a kid. So possibly the biggest trauma, even if you didn't see any blood in front of you in Syria, the biggest trauma when you come as a refugee to a new place is a complete loss of your social structures. Every single one of you, whether or not you recognize it, your identity at Tufts is based in significant part on your social structure here. Your sense of security, personal security, is based on your social structure. At home, it's based on your family and your network there. What would home be if your family and your friends weren't there? So anyone who goes through a process of displacement undergoes that, of losing their social network and their social structure. So education becomes a much different process. If you look at education, the Paulo Freire sense of it is very much a social activity. That the social aspect of school is what made most of you keep going to elementary school on a daily basis. And you didn't want to go to school on those days that you were bullied, and on those days when you were made fun of, and on those days when your friends were sick. You didn't want to go. It's just as simple as that. But there were enough other cultural stimulants to keep you enrolled in school. If you're a refugee, you don't have that. So one of the fundamental aspects of school becomes, how is it a constructive social environment that restores your sense of security? And for the kids that we work with in urban areas particularly, most of them are by themselves or with their older or younger brother making Nescafe in the back of a coffee shop somewhere to give the truck drivers. As a 13-year-old, you don't know anyone except your mom, your dad, and your boss. And usually your dad is either in the Syria Free Army or sick. So the point of education is actually much more psychosocial in terms of what it provides in a sense of stability and security. And if you look at international standards for education in emergencies, one of the primary things is that any education, whether there's a book or a pen involved, the number one thing is it's provided in a safe and secure environment. But that's what underpins any other benefit that's tacked on to education above that. But the fundamental goal of providing education is to catch those kids who would otherwise fall completely off grid. And that's hundreds of thousands of kids in Rhodes right now.
Hi, I'm Becky. And in some of my other classes where we discussed education for like refugees and conflict-torn areas, the idea or concept of social emotional learning has come up. And so I know that was in some of the recommended reading for today, and I'm curious if you could talk a little more about how that factors in, or does it factor in at the Zatari refugee camp, and is it, like, if so, is it more like intertwined within classes, or is there like a separate program? How does that work?
Well, yeah, like Mike said, the creation of an environment that is safe is not so much that you're safe and no one will hit you or bully you, but that it's possible for you to begin to make yourself, you have to make yourself a little bit vulnerable to learn, right? You have to kind of not worry that something's going to happen to you while you're focused on what your teacher's saying. So the social and emotional learning stuff that I gave you to read is the glue that makes the whole thing of our approach to education work. Okay, that's the stuff that sticks people together relationally. It creates the bond between we don't call them a teacher, but we call them a facilitator. So you create another little pro-social community in that classroom. So that's the most important thing from our perspective of what's going on there.
So do the teachers receive any training in that? Or?
Yeah, the teachers to get about 80 hours of training. I mean, it's 80 hours for non-formal education.
For IFD, it's 35 hours.
35 hours.
Our Syrians we have in the camp, most of whom were not teachers previously in Syria, go through 35 hours of training in the fundamental, elements of the EPIIC type methodology in social and emotional learning. And we've delivered all sorts of curricular content through that lens, because that's secondary and frankly easier than working in providing productive and restorative education for kids that have gone through trauma. We are even in the work right now with UNESCO for designing how we can deliver Syrian content through that lens as well, to make sure that kids who are going back are better equipped for taking the exam once they're 14. Because in a system that's completely destroyed, at least you will have paper tests that you can give in any facility. So the idea of progression, what educational progress means, is going to be altered for the next 15 years in Syria. So it's definitely, you can deliver anything through a lens of social and emotional learning, but that has to be what underpins the methodology. So that's where most of the training goes into, and then we of course design the curricular content, and we have certain benchmarks. You have to do this amount of reading, writing, science, etc., etc.
Abuzar.
I'm Abuzar. I work in an IDP camp back in Afghanistan. And what we've tried to do with the IDP camp is that we've tried to provide vocational training or vocational opportunities for these kids within the camp, because there are a lot of needs that need to be met. For example, you're paying these Syrian teachers to teach, for example. So is there a way you can make the economy of the whole camp, since it's such a big camp, be more independent of the rest of the Jordan? Like, can you provide more vocational opportunities within the camp? Because, for example, there's merchandise that you can bring in, like people can start selling the stuff, buying the necessity of life. Sometimes you can provide educational opportunities, and so they create an economy that's not really reliant on the Jordanian government.
You can answer that better.
The underlying assumption there is that the Jordanian government allows there to be illicit economy in the camp, and there isn't. There's much legitimate economic activity, but it's not sanctioned. Technically, there's supposed to be no commerce in Zatari camp. And on top of that, Syrians who are outside the camp are legally banned from working or for having vocational training programs for them, because as the Ministry of Planning says, anything that promotes self-reliance will be disallowed.
Say that again, Mike. That's what we face.
Anything that promotes self-reliance while in the Kingdom of Jordan for Syrians will be disallowed. So NGOs have planned for spending millions of dollars on vocational training, and like that, they get a cease and desist order.
And the reason for that is?
Because the Jordanian economy itself is suffering, irrespective of the Syrian conflict. And in the case of EPIIC, for example, you had so many young Jordanians who have one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the world who have lost their jobs, because Syrians will work for lower wages and longer hours. So they're very protective of their own.
can the UN like impose,
Can the UN
force them into it?
No. The UN has no ability to change Jordanian laws.
Plus, the UN is part of the problem, not part of the solution.
In Zatari, there's a lot of economic activity. There's barber shops. I left it in the IGL, but I brought a pack of cigarettes. That was the first item that used to be smuggled in and out of Zatari camps. Cigarettes that are made in Syria that taste like shit. And they're really cheap.
It tastes like Alhambra, actually.
Yeah. So, in the camp, there's a lot of things going on. Yes, absolutely. Someone had the genius idea of bringing in wheelbarrows, because the camp is 13 square kilometers, and there's one distribution point for 120 to 140,000 people. How are you supposed to lug boxes full of lentils and rice and flour to your tent in, the east butthole of the camp? So someone had the idea of bringing in wheelbarrows, and now there are thousands of wheelbarrows, and who drives them? 8-year-olds. So at the same time, while there's a lot of economic activity, then you have agencies who say, well, that's child labor. So for every amount of economic activity that comes in and self-reliance, someone is against it. And plus there's this entire regulatory climate from the Jordanian government that makes it almost impossible to promote legitimate activity.
Eventually, if they accept that those camps are going to be there for 14 years, then they will have to adopt the stance that allows what you can do in Afghanistan, but that's not where it is yet. And we don't know if they will.
Ethan?
In the Joint Education Needs Assessment report, it says that according to parents, the main reason why their children don't attend school is because their children are disinterested. But then when the children were asked why they didn't attend school, they say that was not a reason at all ever given. So could you kind of explain that difference and why that happened?
You were there, you did that.
I designed the original assessment questions, and Quesco co-authored the report with the person who was tasked to do it. She was from the Norwegian Refugee Council.
Co-opt is not a good term. What do you mean by co-opt?
Co-authored.
Co-authored, okay.
Sensitive.
Yes.
They're
right.
Damn right. Oop.
That was something that I asked myself too. I said, well, if there's that dichotomy, why did they not look into that in the study? Why did they not do a subsequent study about that? Kids say, I want to go to school. But then mom says, he's not really interested in school. And we just left it there. This like awkward, thing on the table that no one seemed to talk about. We brought it up several times. Part of it is self-reporting bias. If you ask a kid, do you want to go to school? 8-year-old Ahmed will say, yeah, I really want to go to school. The teacher's really nice. And then, okay, so it's not the kid. What about the mom? No, he's not interested. Okay, well then you can't really pursue it further because she has technically answered your question. So that's just something that is a paradox that I don't really have much to say about. It was a flaw in the design, and it was something that I brought up on several occasions. It's a combination of both. There are some parents there are some kids who are disinterested. There are some kids who are disinterested who say they are really interested. But then, what the question wasn't asking is, would you like to go to school given the way that the school is in Zatari? It's a very different question to ask a kid, do you want to go to school? Versus, do you want to sit in a classroom of 125 people with a teacher who's speaking a dialect that's a bit strange to you and learning stuff that you don't want to learn about? So it was all in the way that the question is asked that left us with this awkward paradox there.
And then I'll add methodology. The way you triangulate for the answers. So to triangulate is, did you mean this? Or did she mean that? Or did she mean to say this?
Or was
no
it-
triangulation.
Was it mothers that said, was the conflicting answers in the same family, or are those different families? It also didn't go into that, so it was a design of the flaw. It was a flaw in the design of the research.
Good eye.
Somebody, Umar.
My name is Umar. In one of the articles, it stated that education is necessary to combat child labor. And I quote, to forsake their future, whether for their own benefit or for the benefit of the society. But in such extenuating circumstances where the children won't have a future if there's no food on the table and they're starving, where is the line drawn between acceptable child labor in such extenuating circumstances as refugee camps?
Zil, I'm just going to knock this thing off so I don't get recorded.
Turn it, you want it, no?
Oh, that's
it's
on,
okay.
right? That should be on.
I've been fried for this before, so
We
it's
won't,
okay.
we won't play this.
Actually, it is impossible
Maybe.
to tell a child or their family that you cannot work, because if you don't work, you won't eat. It's impossible to say that. What you would like to be able to say is that I don't want you to work where it's dangerous. I don't want you to work where you won't be able to also be educated. So the whole point of alternative education is that you can get your education even if you're doing some other things, all right? And part of the mentoring approach that the educational facilitators take to the young people is to be aware of what they are doing so that you can stop the stuff that would be not good for them. But you cannot in fact say that they cannot work. At the same time, I would go on record as saying you cannot work at the expense of your education. Therefore, you need an alternative way to educate young people rather than the formal way. So, very good comment. I do not believe the fact that you can say everybody has to go to school. No work.
Well, you got the last question.
So as you just said, children shouldn't have to work in place of getting an education, but how do you incentivize or prioritize education when obviously there are a lot of systemic problems and there's the problem of parents not being interested in their daughters, or sons who, as Mary was saying, their fathers are either in an army or are sick and they feel like they're responsible for providing perhaps money or food for their siblings and their mother. How do you tell them that they should be getting this education that may amount to nothing because they can't work in this country, whereas they could be pushing a wheelbarrow or they could be doing some sort of child labor and that would be providing a more immediate gain for them?
Good question, and let me answer it in two different universes. Universe one is the non-refugee situation, where we can actually, we can provide education, alternative education for you. We can reduce the danger to you if you work, and you still can work.
And
So,
you can send them to vocational training through the Jordanian government systems.
yeah, once they reach the
Yeah.
age that they can do that. So it requires, that was the 2 years of creativity and discussions that it took with the Ministry of Education. That can be done. That's the whole point of GED, right? In the emergency situation, it's simpler and yet more complex also. Because people in the camp, there are certain things provided for you. And some people come back to the camp because it's more expensive living outside. But in general, the questions of how you will survive, because remember, nobody can work. You don't have an income source. How you will survive and how your children will be educated is still not answered. Do we have the mechanisms in place that the answer, that would make up the answer? Yes, we do have the alternative education stuff. What we don't have is that a dad or older brother could have a job so that you wouldn't have to work. That's the part that we don't have an answer for.
I mean, I'll add something quickly to that. Last weekend I was at a camp. We do a 4-day little camping trip with boys who are in our non-formal education program, which is the GED program with the Ministry of Education. About 70% Syrian, 30% Jordanians. And 80% of them work full-time. They come to our center about 2.5 hours a day. And they have to ask for a break. They have to ask to leave at 4 o'clock. And so I asked some of the kids, how did you get 4 days off? He said, for some of them, he had his boss meet the teacher. For others, he says, I just asked for some time off. As a 14-year-old, imagine having to go for asking for leave. It's just, already he's in such a terrible situation. But how do you engage? And for a certain population, depending on what they're going through, what their priorities are, and what their family composition and needs are, it's never my place to tell them you shouldn't work. And he might have to work for the next 3 years until he's full-time employment. But at least if he's in Jordan, there's ways for them to get certified alternatively. And then with the Syrian system, even if they grow up in Jordan, so to speak, they'll still qualify for reintegration, assuming the Syrian system gets its act together at some point. So it's never our place to tell them you can't and shouldn't work. And we won't pull all of them out of child labor, because in some cases, without a cash incentive, that's really not in the best interest of the family. So it's an ethical dilemma, but in my work with Quest Group, it's always what is the best interest of this child and this family. And as long as there's not exploitation involved, we can't do much.
This concludes section A. Curt, what are you talking about this evening?
I'm going to take you more into my personal experience and how, what is the topic that I have this evening? The preview, ladies and gentlemen, is restoring agency in the midst of crisis.
What time, where?
7 o'clock in Barnum 08.
Remember the contract you signed. We'll see you there this evening. See you shortly. Eat well. Quick announcement from Olivia.
Guys, we mentioned, I don't know, way back when, that we may have the IDF spokesperson from the Judea and Samaria Division, which is West Bank, coming here. He may be able to speak this Thursday, and he's going to be talking about whatever you guys want. So we can go into controversies in, the IDF operations in the West Bank, talk strategic communication, a range of things. How many of you would be interested and available to come if we do this on Thursday?
What time?
What time works for you guys? Right after class on Thursday? No, I'm saying seven. How about hands? Right after class? And no for right after class. What about later in the evening? If we do it at say 7, does that work for everyone?
Come to the class.
David Rhodes is coming to you.
Yeah.
Can we do 3 blocks?
Is there a food block? Hey guys, I would love to have this aspect covered. So I think what we need to do is to, what? Send out a note to you guys? How do you communicate?
Doodle.
What's it called? Wait, guys, just concentrate for a second, please. What's the best way to do this? Doodle? All right, so just if you contact Heather.
Not enough people.
People aren't. Hey guys, one last second here. Those of you who are on the program committee, do you realize you're meeting tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning? Yes. Yes, you got it? Thumbs up. Where can I see program people? I'll see you at 8:30. Yes.
This is the first thing that you're signing up for.